The curse. In the far reaches of the galaxy, where stars glittered like scattered jewels, there existed countless civilizations. Some were known for their beauty, others for their strength. But among them, there was one race that everyone feared and despised. They were called the Lyrans, and wherever they went, disaster followed. At least, that's what people believed. Kaylee was one of them. She was different from others of her kind, quiet, gentle, and curious. But none of that mattered. To the galaxy, she was cursed. The story begins on a busy space station named Arcanus Prime, a giant hub where travelers from all species gathered to trade, work, or explore. Kaylee walked silently through the crowded marketplace, her hood pulled low to hide her face. She knew better than to draw attention to herself. The last time someone recognized her as a Lyran, a riot broke out. Kaylee stopped at a small stall selling food. The alien vendor froze the moment he saw her glowing violet eyes. His hands trembled as he handed her the food, avoiding her gaze. "Take it and leave," he said in a shaky voice. Kaylee sighed but said nothing. She placed a few credits on the counter and quickly moved away. She was used to this treatment: fearful looks, whispered curses, and the blame for anything that went wrong. As she walked, Kaylee heard murmurs behind her. Is that a Lyran? Why would she come here? Doesn't she know she's not welcome? Get her out before something bad happens. She ignored them and quickened her pace. But no matter how much she tried to blend in, trouble always found her. Suddenly, the ground shook violently. A loud explosion echoed through the station. People screamed as smoke filled the air. A nearby section of the market had collapsed, trapping several beings under the rubble. "It's her," someone shouted, pointing at Kaylee. "The cursed one." Kaylee froze. Panic spread through the crowd like wildfire. She caused this. She brought the explosion. Get her before she destroys the whole station. Kaylee shook her head, her heart pounding. "No, I didn't do anything," she cried, but her voice was drowned out by the angry mob. They began to close in, shouting and throwing objects. Kaylee backed away, her hands raised in surrender. She didn't want to hurt anyone. All she wanted was to survive. Just as the mob was about to reach her, Kaylee turned and ran. She darted through the narrow alleys of the station, her breath ragged and her vision blurred by tears. She could still hear their angry voices behind her, echoing in her mind. Cursed. Cursed. Finally, she found a dark corner and collapsed against the wall. Her whole body shook as she tried to calm herself. "Why does this keep happening?" she whispered to herself. "Why am I cursed?" For a moment, the world was silent. The chaos of the market felt far away. Kaylee hugged her knees, feeling more alone than ever. But she wasn't alone. In the shadows nearby, a man watched her. He leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, his sharp green eyes focused on her. He was tall and rugged, with short dark hair and a faint scar running down his cheek. His clothes were old and patched, but his presence carried an air of confidence. This man was Ethan Cross, a scavenger and adventurer who traveled the galaxy looking for things others had thrown away. He wasn't afraid of much, and he certainly wasn't afraid of the so-called cursed Lyran sitting in front of him. Ethan had seen what happened in the marketplace. He had followed Kaylee, curious about her. Something about her didn't add up. She didn't seem dangerous. In fact, she looked more scared than anyone else. As Kaylee sat there, lost in her thoughts, Ethan stepped closer. His boots made a faint sound against the metal floor, and Kaylee's head shot up. Her violet eyes locked onto his, filled with both fear and defiance. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice shaking. Ethan gave her a small smirk. "Relax. I'm not here to hurt you." Kaylee narrowed her eyes. "Then why are you following me?" Ethan shrugged casually. "I saw what happened back there. They blamed you for that explosion, didn't they?" Kaylee looked away, her shoulders tense. "They always blame me. They think I bring bad luck, that I'm cursed." "And are you?" Ethan asked, his tone light but curious. Kaylee glared at him. No, I didn't cause that explosion. I've never caused anything. Ethan nodded slowly, as if considering her words. Maybe you're not cursed, he said after a moment. Kaylee blinked, surprised by his answer. Then why does this always happen to me? Ethan leaned closer, his expression unreadable. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Before Kaylee could respond, a loud voice echoed through the alley. There she is. Get the cursed one. Kaylee's eyes widened as a group of bounty hunters appeared, weapons raised. Ethan sighed and pulled a small blaster from his belt. Looks like things are about to get interesting, he said with a grin. Kaylee stared at him in shock. You're helping me. Ethan winked. I've always had a soft spot for troublemakers. The human. Kaylee's heart pounded as she glanced at the bounty hunters. Their sleek armor gleamed under the dim lights of the alley, and their weapons hummed ominously, ready to fire. She had faced many dangers before, but something about this moment felt different. She wasn't alone this time. Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself between Kaylee and the hunters. He held his small blaster casually, as if he were more interested in a conversation than a fight. The smirk on his face didn't match the tension in the air. Gentlemen, Ethan began, his voice calm but firm, I'd suggest lowering those weapons. I'd hate to mess up that shiny armor of yours. The leader of the group, a tall alien with a sharp jaw and glowing orange eyes, sneered. Stay out of this, human. That Leyran is worth a fortune. Step aside, and we'll forget you were ever here. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. See, that's where we have a problem. I don't like seeing people bullied, especially not by a bunch of trigger-happy mercs. The leader growled and raised his weapon. You have no idea what you're dealing with. That girl is cursed. She'll bring destruction to everyone around her. She's dangerous. Ethan glanced back at Kaylee, who looked terrified but defiant. Her violet eyes met his, silently pleading for help. He turned back to the bounty hunters and shrugged. Dangerous or not, I think I'll take my chances. Before the hunters could react, Ethan fired a shot. The blaster bolt hit a metal pipe above their heads, causing a burst of steam to erupt and momentarily blind them. Run, Ethan shouted, grabbing Kaylee's arm. They sprinted down the alley, the sounds of shouting and footsteps echoing behind them. Kaylee struggled to keep up, her mind racing with questions. Why was this human helping her? What did he want? They turned a corner and slipped into a narrow maintenance tunnel. Ethan pulled a panel off the wall and gestured for Kaylee to crawl through. Hurry up, he said, his voice tense but steady. Kaylee hesitated. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice trembling. Ethan looked at her, his expression softening for a moment. Because you look like you could use a break. Now go. Kaylee crawled into the tunnel and Ethan followed, pulling the panel back into place just as the bounty hunters stormed into the alley. Inside the tunnel, it was dark and cramped. Kaylee could hear the faint sound of her own breathing and the distant voices of the hunters searching for them. After a few minutes of crawling, they emerged into a small maintenance room. Ethan leaned against the wall, catching his breath. That was close, he said with a grin. Kaylee crossed her arms, glaring at him. Who are you? And why did you help me? Ethan raised an eyebrow. You're welcome, by the way. Kaylee's glare didn't waver. She wasn't used to kindness, and she didn't trust it. I don't need your help. I've been running my whole life. I can take care of myself. Ethan chuckled. Yeah, I noticed. You're really good at making friends, too. Kaylee's cheeks flushed with anger. I didn't ask for this. People blame me for things I didn't do. They call me cursed, but I'm not. Ethan studied her for a moment, his green eyes thoughtful. Maybe you're not, but that doesn't stop them from believing it, does it? Kaylee looked away, her shoulders slumping. No, it doesn't. Ethan sighed and sat down on a crate. Look, I don't know if you're cursed or not, but I do know what it's like to be an outcast. Humans weren't exactly welcomed with open arms when we started traveling the stars. We had to fight for everything. So, yeah, I've got a soft spot for people who get a raw deal. Kaylee frowned, her curiosity getting the better of her. You're a human. I've heard about your kind. You're different. Ethan grinned. That's one way to put it. But right now, we've got bigger problems. Those hunters aren't going to give up easily. Kaylee hesitated, then asked, Why are they after me? What did I do? Ethan shrugged. You tell me. Is there something you're not sharing? Kaylee's hand instinctively moved to her satchel, clutching it protectively. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What's in the bag? Nothing, Kaylee said quickly, but the flicker of panic in her eyes told a different story. Ethan leaned forward. Look, if you want my help, you need to be honest with me. Are you carrying something valuable? Something dangerous? Kaylee hesitated, then slowly opened the satchel. Inside was a small glowing device that pulsed faintly with light. Ethan stared at it, his expression unreadable. What is that? He asked. Kaylee shook her head. I don't know. I've had it for as long as I can remember. But wherever I go, people seem to know about it. They chase me, call me cursed, and say it's my fault when bad things happen. Ethan frowned, leaning closer to examine the device. It doesn't look like a weapon. More like a signal. A signal for what? Kaylee asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he stood up and began pacing. If that thing's broadcasting, it's no wonder they're tracking you. We need to figure out what it's sending and why. Before Kaylee could respond, an alert blared from Ethan's wrist communicator. A warning flashed on the screen. Multiple ships detected. Approaching fast. Ethan looked at Kaylee, his jaw tightening. Looks like they called reinforcements. Time to go. Kaylee's stomach churned as she followed him out of the room. Go where? There's nowhere safe for me. Ethan glanced back at her, his eyes fierce. There's a colony not far from here. It's hidden, off the radar. If anyone can help us figure out what this thing is, it's them. Kaylee hesitated, then nodded. She didn't trust him completely, but she didn't have much choice. As they made their way to Ethan's ship, the glowing device in her satchel pulsed brighter, as if sensing the danger ahead. The chase. The ship's engines roared to life, their deep hum vibrating through the metallic walls of the small hangar. Ethan sat in the pilot's seat, his hands dancing across the controls as Kaylee nervously strapped herself into the co-pilot's chair. She clutched the glowing device tightly, its faint pulse matching the rapid beating of her heart. Buckle up, Ethan said with a grin, flipping a switch. Things are about to get bumpy. Kaylee glanced at the viewport. Outside, the bounty hunters had arrived in full force, their ships descending like vultures. The station's security systems had already failed, leaving the docking bay exposed. They're not going to let us leave, Kaylee said, her voice trembling. Ethan smirked as he powered up the ship's thrusters. They can try to stop us. Doesn't mean they'll succeed. The ship jolted forward, lifting off the ground and shooting into open space. As they cleared the hangar, Kaylee caught sight of the bounty hunter ships, sleek, black vessels bristling with weapons, taking off in pursuit. They're gaining on us, Kaylee shouted, gripping the edge of her seat. Let them, Ethan replied calmly, flipping a series of switches. This isn't my first chase. Suddenly, the ship veered hard to the left, narrowly dodging a barrage of laser fire. The glowing projectiles lit up the dark expanse of space, missing them by mere meters. Ethan laughed, the thrill of the moment evident in his voice. See, told you this would be fun. Kaylee didn't share his enthusiasm. Fun. They're trying to kill us. Details, Ethan said with a shrug, pulling the ship into a sharp dive to avoid another volley of lasers. Kaylee glanced at the glowing device in her lap. Its light had grown brighter, almost blinding. She could feel its energy, a strange warmth that seemed to seep into her skin. This thing, she said, holding it up. They're not after me, are they? They're after this. Ethan glanced at the device. his jaw tightening. Maybe. Or maybe they think taking you out is the fastest way to get it. Either way, we need to lose them. The ship shook violently as a missile exploded nearby. Kaylee gripped her seat, her knuckles white. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Ethan grinned. With a little trick I like to call get creative. Before Kaylee could protest, Ethan flipped the ship into a steep climb, heading straight for a nearby asteroid field. The massive rocks floated lazily through space, their jagged edges glinting in the light of a distant star. "You're not serious," Kaylee said, her voice rising with panic. "Deadly serious," Ethan replied, maneuvering the ship into the field. "They'll have to follow us. And out here, skill beats firepower." Kaylee didn't have time to argue. The ship plunged into the asteroid field, weaving between the massive rocks. Ethan's hands were a blur on the controls, his focus unshakable. Behind them, the bounty hunters' ships followed, their weapons firing relentlessly. The next few minutes were a chaotic blur of movement. Ethan piloted the ship with precision, dodging asteroids and enemy fire with equal ease. Kaylee could only watch, her heart in her throat, as the glowing device pulsed brighter and brighter. Suddenly, a sharp beep sounded from the control panel. Ethan glanced at it, his expression darkening. "They've locked onto us," he said. "Missile incoming." Kaylee's eyes widened. "What do we do?" Ethan gritted his teeth. "Hold on to something." He slammed the controls to the right, sending the ship into a sharp barrel roll. The missile streaked past them, narrowly missing the hull, before slamming into a nearby asteroid and exploding in a brilliant flash of light. Kaylee let out a shaky breath, but her relief was short-lived. The bounty hunters weren't giving up. More ships had joined the chase, their weapons lighting up the asteroid field. "This isn't working," Kaylee said. "We can't outrun them forever." Ethan didn't respond immediately. His eyes flicked to the glowing device in her hands, then back to the viewport. "That thing," he said, nodding toward the device. "Does it do anything else, other than glow and attract trouble?" Kaylee hesitated. I don't know. I've never tried to use it." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Well, now might be a good time to start experimenting." Kaylee frowned, unsure of what to do. The device pulsed steadily, its light growing almost unbearably bright. She held it tightly, closing her eyes and focusing on it. The warmth of the device spread through her hands, into her arms, and then her entire body. She felt a strange sensation, as if the device were alive, responding to her thoughts. Suddenly, the light intensified, flooding the cockpit with a brilliant white glow. Ethan shielded his eyes, but Kaylee felt no pain. Instead, she heard a low hum, like the sound of a distant song. The device emitted a pulse of energy that rippled outward, passing through the ship and into space. The bounty hunter ships, still pursuing them, were caught in the wave. Their engines sputtered and died, leaving them adrift in the asteroid field. Ethan stared at the viewport, his mouth open in shock. What just happened? Kaylee opened her eyes, her breathing heavy. "I don't know. It just happened." Ethan shook his head, a mix of awe and disbelief on his face. "Whatever that thing is, it's more than just a relic. It's a game changer." Before they could celebrate, the control panel beeped again. A new alert flashed on the screen. Unknown energy signature detected. Massive object approaching. Ethan frowned, his fingers flying across the controls. What now? Kaylee looked out the viewport, her eyes widening as a massive shadow loomed over them. A colossal ship, unlike anything she'd ever seen, emerged from the darkness. Its sleek alien design glowed with the same light as the device in her hands. Ethan let out a low whistle. "Looks like we woke something up." The truth revealed. The massive ship drifted silently in the void, its presence overwhelming. Its surface shimmered with intricate patterns of light, flowing like rivers of molten energy. It didn't look like any ship Kaylee or Ethan had ever seen before. It was ancient, yet impossibly advanced, as if it had been waiting in the shadows of time for this very moment. Ethan's hands hovered over the controls, his usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. Well, this wasn't on my schedule for the day. Kaylee stared at the glowing vessel, her fingers tightening around the relic. The device in her lap pulsed in perfect sync with the ship's lights, as if they were communicating. She could feel the energy coursing through her, a connection she didn't understand. What is it?" she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "I don't know, but I don't think it's here to invite us to a party." Before Kelly could respond, a low hum resonated through their ship. The sound was deep, almost musical, and it made the very air around them vibrate. The glowing vessel seemed to come alive, shifting its position to face them. "It's scanning us," Ethan said, his voice low. He tapped a few buttons on the console, trying to analyze the signal. Whatever's on that ship, it's not friendly, or maybe it's just curious. The relic in Kelly's hands grew hotter, the light intensifying. She winced, but she didn't let go. "It's reacting to me. I think it wants me to do something." Ethan gave her a sideways glance. "Like what? Wave at it." Before she could answer, a beam of light shot out from the alien ship, engulfing their small vessel. The ship's systems flickered, and a mechanical voice echoed through the cockpit. "Energy signature confirmed. Initiating extraction." "Extraction," Ethan repeated, his voice rising. "Oh, that's never a good word." The beam began pulling their ship closer to the colossal vessel. Ethan fought the controls, but it was useless. The ship was caught in an invisible grip, and no amount of maneuvering could break them free. Kaylee gripped the edges of her seat, panic flashing across her face. "What do they want from us?" Ethan glanced at her, then at the glowing relic. "Not us. You." The ship was drawn into a docking bay within the alien vessel. The walls of the bay were smooth and metallic, glowing faintly with the same patterns as the ship's exterior. As their ship came to a stop, the beam of light disappeared, leaving them in eerie silence. Ethan unstrapped himself and stood, grabbing a blaster from the storage compartment. "Stay behind me," he said, his usual humor replaced by a grim determination. Kaylee hesitated. "What if they're not here to hurt us?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "I'd rather be wrong with a blaster in my hand than right without one." The ship's hatch opened with a hiss, and a cool, glowing mist poured in. Ethan stepped out cautiously, his weapon raised, while Kaylee followed close behind, clutching the relic. The docking bay was massive, its ceiling towering high above them. Strange symbols etched into the walls glowed faintly, casting shifting patterns of light across the floor. The air felt alive, humming with an energy that made Kelly's skin tingle. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the space, not mechanical, but deep and resonant, like a chorus of countless beings speaking as one. "Bearer of the beacon, step forward." Kaylee froze. "Bearer of the beacon. Is it talking about me?" Ethan glanced at the relic in her hands. "Unless I'm secretly carrying a glowing artifact, yeah, it's you." Kaylee hesitated, but the voice repeated, more insistent this time. "Step forward, bearer." Taking a deep breath, she stepped away from Ethan and approached the center of the bay. As she did, a column of light descended from above, enveloping her. Ethan started to move, but a force field appeared, blocking his path. "Kelly," he shouted, slamming his fists against the barrier. "It's okay," she said, though her voice wavered. I think I need to do this." Within the column of light, Kaylee felt weightless. The relic in her hands floated upward, spinning slowly as its glow merged with the light around her. The voice spoke again. "You carry the last beacon of the Erythian Guardians. Do you know its purpose?" Kaylee shook her head. "No, I don't even know why it chose me." "The beacon was created to summon the Guardians, protectors of the galaxy. It was never meant to be in mortal hands. Yet it bonded to you." Kelly's voice trembled. "Why me? I'm nobody. People hate me. They call me cursed. The voice paused, as if considering her words. You are not cursed, bearer. You are chosen. The beacon only bonds to those with the strength to unite and the wisdom to guide. It has judged you worthy. Kaylee's eyes widened. But everywhere I go, bad things happen. People die. How can I be worthy? The light around her pulsed softly, almost soothingly. Misfortune follows not because you bring it, but because those who fear the beacon seek to destroy it. They fear what it will awaken. Ethan, still outside the barrier, listened intently. Awaken? Awaken what? The voice answered. The sentinel, the last guardian. It sleeps within this vessel, awaiting the bearer to command it. But be warned, those who seek its power will stop at nothing to claim it. You must decide whether to awaken the sentinel or destroy the beacon forever. Kaylee's mind raced. She didn't want this responsibility, but she couldn't ignore the truth. The relic had brought her here for a reason. What happens if I awaken it? She asked. The sentinel will fight to protect life, but it will also bring war to those who oppose its purpose. The choice is yours, bearer. The light faded, and the relic floated back into her hands. The barrier around Ethan disappeared, and he rushed to her side. What did it say? He asked, his voice urgent. Kaylee looked at him, her expression conflicted. It said, I have to make a choice. Wake the sentinel or destroy the beacon. Ethan frowned. And if we destroy it? Kaylee hesitated. Then everything ends. The war stops, but so does any chance to fight back. Before they could discuss further, alarms blared throughout the vessel. The voice returned, its tone grave. They are here. The enemy has found us. Ethan grabbed Kaylee's arm. Whatever you're deciding, you better decide fast. Kaylee stared at the relic, its glow pulsing with anticipation. The fate of the galaxy rested in her hands. The discovery. The shrill wail of the alarm echoed throughout the colossal ship. Kaylee felt a surge of panic as the lights flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. The fate of the galaxy, her life, and the lives of everyone she cared about seemed to hang in the balance. Ethan pulled her away from the center of the docking bay, his face grim. We don't have time to wait, Kaylee. We've got to make a move before those enemies show up. I don't know what to do, Kaylee whispered, looking down at the glowing relic still clutched tightly in her hands. Its energy pulsed rhythmically, almost as if it was alive, urging her to make the choice. The humming sound was louder now, like a heartbeat, and Kaylee couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, waiting. We need answers, Ethan said, his voice low but insistent. Let's get to the command center of this ship. Maybe we can learn more about the Sentinel and why it's so important. Kaylee nodded, still lost in her thoughts. Her fingers brushed the surface of the relic as they walked through the dark corridors of the alien vessel. With each step, the walls seemed to hum more intensely, reacting to her presence. It felt as though the ship itself was alive, sentient, almost as if it had recognized her as the beacon's bearer. They turned a corner, and the passage ahead opened into a large chamber. The walls were made of a smooth metallic substance that reflected the soft light from the pulsating patterns on the ceiling. At the center of the room stood a massive holographic display, hovering above a circular platform. The air felt charged with energy, and Kaylee couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as she approached the platform. This is it, Ethan said, pointing to the display. We can find out what this place is really about. Kaylee stepped forward, and the hologram flared to life. A series of images, ancient symbols, star maps, and blueprints appeared before them, each one shifting and transforming as if alive. At the center of it all was an image of a colossal figure, the Sentinel. It was an imposing humanoid form, covered in shimmering armor that glowed with the same light as the relic. This is the Guardian, Kaylee asked, her voice filled with awe and fear. It looks ancient. Ethan studied the image, his brow furrowed. Yeah, This thing is old, way older than anything we've ever seen. But look, he said, pointing to a section of the hologram. It's not just a weapon. It's a protector. The hologram zoomed in on the Sentinel's chest, revealing a core that looked like a glowing heart. It was almost identical to the relic Kaylee carried, and it sent a shiver down her spine. The connection between the relic and the Sentinel was undeniable. It's part of the same technology, Ethan murmured. The Sentinel was built to protect the galaxy, but there's more. Look at this. He activated another part of the display. A new image appeared, showing a cataclysmic battle between the Guardians and a fleet of dark ships. The darkness was unmistakable. It was an invasion. A war fought across the stars. The relic had been created to summon the Sentinel to fight back against the forces of destruction. This was the last stand, Ethan said softly. The Guardians were outnumbered, but they fought to protect the galaxy from whatever this enemy was. And they lost. Kaylee stepped closer, her heart racing. She felt the weight of the legacy she was about to inherit. But as she looked at the final image, something caught her eye. A small dark symbol appeared beneath the scene of the battle. A sigil Kaylee recognized. It was the same symbol she'd seen in her nightmares, the same symbol the bounty hunters had carried on their armor. They're not just enemies, Kaylee said, her voice trembling. They're part of something bigger. This war, it's not over. Ethan looked up at her, his expression darkening. You're telling me they've been waiting all this time? Kaylee nodded. I think so. The relic didn't just lead me here. It led them here too. The ones who were chasing me. They know about this war. They want the Sentinel's power, and they'll stop at nothing to get it. Before Ethan could respond, a low rumble echoed through the ship. The holographic display flickered, and the air seemed to hum with energy. Kaylee's breath caught in her throat. It was happening again. The relic in her hands began to glow brightly, matching the pulse of the ship. It's reacting, she said, almost to herself. It's calling to the Sentinel. Ethan's eyes widened. Are you sure? I don't know how, but I can feel it, Kaylee whispered, feeling the power surge through her. The connection between her and the relic was deepening. It was as if the Sentinel's essence was awakening inside of her. Suddenly, a voice boomed through the room. Bearer of the beacon, your choice has been made. Kaylee spun around, searching for the source of the voice. But there was nothing visible, only the shifting light from the display. The voice continued. The Sentinel awakens. The war begins again. Kaylee's heart pounded in her chest. What war? What are you talking about? The voice answered, its tone grave. The enemy has returned. They seek to claim the Sentinel's power. They will destroy all who stand in their way. The time for peace is over. The time for battle has begun. The walls of the room began to shake. The floor vibrated with a deep resonance, and the glowing symbols on the walls intensified. The sound of distant engines rumbled through the ship. They're here, Ethan said, his voice tight with urgency. We don't have much time. The holographic display shifted again, revealing a map of the galaxy. Red dots blinked ominously on the screen, marking the locations of enemy fleets, ships identical to those Kaylee had seen before. The invaders were scattered across the galaxy, but they were closing in on their location fast. We need to get to the Sentinel, Kaylee said, her voice determined. We need to activate it. Now. Ethan nodded, pulling out his blaster. Lead the way, then. I'm right behind you. As they made their way through the corridors of the alien ship, the walls began to glow brighter, the ship responding to Kaylee's presence. The hum in the air was almost deafening, as if the very ship was alive, reacting to the awakening of the Sentinel. Kaylee's heart raced with both fear and excitement. The decision had been made. There was no turning back. The Sentinel was awakening, and so was the war. The ancient power. The ship rumbled as Kaylee and Ethan sprinted through its vast, metallic corridors, the walls seemingly closing in as the vibrations of the awakening Sentinel echoed through the vessel. The deeper they went, the more intense the pulse of energy became. The ship was alive, its ancient systems kicking into motion as if recognizing the presence of its true bearer. The air was thick with anticipation, and Kaylee could feel the weight of destiny settling over her. She wasn't just running to activate a weapon. She was running to control the power that could reshape the galaxy. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan asked, his voice strained as he pushed forward. He glanced over his shoulder, eyes scanning the dark, unfamiliar corridors. "The ship's giving off some serious energy, and I don't think that's just for show." "I don't know what's happening," Kaylee admitted, her voice shaky but resolute. "But I can feel it, Ethan. The relic, it's connected to me and to this place. I think I'm the one who has to awaken it." The walls seemed to hum with every step they took, and the glowing symbols carved into the ship's surfaces were shifting. The ship was reacting to her presence, amplifying the power of the relic. Kaylee gripped it tightly, her fingers trembling with a mix of fear and exhilaration. She had no idea what would happen once the Sentinel was awakened. But she did know one thing. There was no turning back now. As they rounded a corner, they found themselves standing before a large, circular door. The energy coming from within was immense. Kaylee could feel it in her bones. The door itself seemed to pulse in time with the beat of her heart, and a deep, resonating hum vibrated through the metal. Above the door, an inscription glowed brightly in the same ancient script that had appeared in the hologram earlier. Ethan stepped forward, his hand resting on the edge of his blaster, eyeing the door with suspicion. "This looks like the real deal," he said quietly. "But if anything happens, we're not going to have much time to react." Kaylee nodded, her heart racing as she raised the relic. The glow from the device in her hand synchronized with the energy in the room, responding to the ancient mechanism before her. It was as if the ship was waiting for her signal. Without thinking, she stepped forward and placed the relic against the door. The moment she made contact, the symbols surrounding the door flared to life. The walls trembled, and a sudden surge of energy shot through her, overwhelming her senses. For a moment, she thought she might collapse. But then, as if responding to her will, the door slowly began to open, revealing the chamber beyond. Inside, at the center of the room, stood the Sentinel. It was magnificent. The figure was colossal, towering over them, encased in gleaming, silver-like armor that reflected the light of the ship's glow. Its structure was humanoid, but its proportions were almost too perfect, too symmetrical. Its eyes, if they could even be called that, were glowing orbs of bright light, and in its chest, there was a core that pulsed with an energy Kaylee could feel even from where she stood. The room around it was vast, filled with ancient technology and strange machinery, all in perfect stillness, as if waiting for something. The Sentinel was no mere weapon. It was a guardian, a being of unimaginable power. Kaylee's breath caught in her throat as she took a tentative step forward. The relic in her hand hummed in response to the presence of the Sentinel, and she could feel its pull, urging her to make contact, to command it. "What is this place?" Ethan asked, his voice awed but cautious. "I think this is where it all began," Kaylee whispered, her eyes glued to the Sentinel. "This is where the Guardians were created." She stepped closer, the relic glowing brighter in her hand. The moment she crossed the threshold into the chamber, the Sentinel's massive form began to move. Its eyes, those brilliant orbs of light, locked onto her. It was alive, it was aware, and it was waiting for her to make the next move. The air around her grew thick with energy, and she felt the room begin to hum, like a great machine coming to life. Her hand trembled as she raised the relic, but then, with a deep breath, she placed it against the Sentinel's chest. The relic resonated with the power of the Sentinel's core, and for a moment, Kaylee was engulfed in a blinding light. The ship shook violently as the Sentinel's energy began to surge through her, filling her with knowledge, power, and something else, something older. She could feel the memories of the Guardians, the pain of their last battle, and their final command: to protect the galaxy at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing everything. The light around her subsided, and Kaylee stood alone in the center of the chamber. Her heart was racing, but now she understood. The Sentinel was not just a weapon. It was a protector, forged from the ancient will of the Guardians to prevent the destruction of the galaxy. Kaylee could feel the energy coursing through her, the Sentinel's power now linked to her very being. She wasn't just controlling it. She was becoming it. The bond between her and the Sentinel was complete. The voice of the ship resonated again, its tone urgent. The enemy has arrived. The war is upon us. Kaylee's eyes flashed with determination. She turned to Ethan, her expression unwavering. We don't have a choice now. The war they started, it's back. But we're not going to run. We're going to fight. Ethan nodded, his face set with resolve. What do we do now? Kaylee looked at the colossal figure standing before her, the Sentinel now fully awakened, its energy crackling in the air. She could feel its strength, its purpose, and she knew what she had to do. We take the fight to them, Kaylee said, her voice steady. We end this war, once and for all. She raised her hand, and the Sentinel responded. Its massive form moved, stepping forward with power and grace, its weapons activating, ready for the battle ahead. The time for hiding was over. The time for battle had come. The galaxy would either be saved or torn apart by the choices made in the moments that followed. Her true worth. The hum of energy in the air had become deafening as Kaylee stood at the heart of the ancient ship. The Sentinel, now fully activated, towered behind her like a silent sentinel of death and protection. The immense power it radiated made the ship vibrate, and Kaylee felt its presence inside her. Every movement, every pulse of energy, was now an extension of her own will. The voice of the ship echoed again, its tone urgent. Enemy forces inbound. Preparations are complete. Awaiting command. Kaylee's heart raced as she turned toward the massive viewport. Outside, a fleet of warships filled the sky, their dark shapes looming ominously against the stars. The invaders, the very same forces that had once tried to destroy the Guardians, were back. They had come for the Sentinel, for the power Kaylee now controlled. But this time, Kaylee was no longer the helpless outcast. She was no longer the girl accused of being cursed. She was the bearer, the one chosen to wield the Sentinel's power and protect the galaxy from annihilation. Ethan stood beside her, his expression a mix of awe and concern. Are you sure about this? You've got the power to stop them, but that doesn't mean they're going to roll over and let us win. These guys are ruthless. Kaylee turned to him, her violet eyes burning with determination. I didn't choose this power. It chose me. But now I know what I have to do. I have to protect this galaxy, Ethan. I can't run anymore. I won't let anyone else suffer because of this war. Ethan nodded slowly, a look of respect in his eyes. He had seen Kaylee struggle, seen her fight against the weight of being labeled cursed. But now she was something more. She wasn't just the girl the galaxy feared. She was its last hope. We'll fight together, Ethan said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. Whatever happens, we fight together. Kaylee took a deep breath, her fingers grazing the surface of the relic once more. She could feel its power coursing through her veins, connecting her to the Sentinel. The ancient machine that had waited for this moment was now hers to command. The ship's systems came alive, preparing for the battle ahead. Enemies entering range. Targeting systems online. Awaiting orders. The message flashed across the screens in front of Kaylee. Her hand hovered over the controls. And for a moment, everything seemed still. Then, with a single movement, she activated the ship's weapons. The air seemed to crackle with power as the shields engaged, the weapons systems warming up. Engage all systems, she commanded, her voice clear and authoritative. The ship's engines roared to life as the energy of the Sentinel fueled the ship's power. The massive warships of the invaders grew ever closer, their weapons primed and ready to strike. But Kaylee was ready. The relic in her hand pulsed with energy, and the Sentinel's movements synchronized with her thoughts. She was no longer an outcast. She was a force to be reckoned with. The first wave of enemy ships opened fire, their laser blasts streaking across the void of space. Kelly's ship was hit, but the shields flared brightly, absorbing the blast with ease. In the next instant, she turned the ship sharply, evading another barrage and firing back with devastating force. The enemy ship scattered, but Kaylee wasn't finished. The Sentinel's power flowed through her, amplifying her senses, her reactions, making her movements faster and more precise than ever before. She could feel every missile before it even launched, every ship's movements before they even made them. She was in complete control. All enemy ships locked, targeting and preparing counterattack. The ship's AI reported. "Fire," Kelly commanded, her voice filled with cold precision. The ship's weapons erupted, massive blasts of energy streaking through space, tearing apart the invaders' ships with ease. They didn't stand a chance against the combined might of Kelly's will and the Sentinel's power. Ships exploded in fiery bursts, debris scattering like falling stars. But the enemy fleet was vast, and Kaylee knew this battle would not be won with a single attack. She looked out into the endless void, watching as reinforcements poured in from the depths of space. More ships, darker and more powerful than the first wave, descended upon them. "Stay sharp," Ethan said, his voice tense. "There's too many of them. We need a plan." Kelly's mind raced. She couldn't just keep fighting like this. The enemy was relentless, and she couldn't waste the power of the Sentinel without strategy. Then something inside her clicked. She looked at the ancient star maps displayed across the ship's systems, noticing a familiar pattern in the movements of the enemy fleet. They were positioning themselves, forming a perimeter around a specific location. "Ethan, they're after the core," Kaylee said suddenly. "The core of this ship. If they get to it, they'll be able to shut us down, or worse, they'll take control of the Sentinel." Ethan cursed under his breath. "They know where to hit us. Let's go stop them." Kelly's gaze hardened. The enemy was coming for the heart of the ship, and she couldn't let them have it. With a single motion, she ordered the ship to divert all power to the central core, preparing for the final confrontation. Core defenses online. All power diverted to central core. Enemy forces en route. The ship's central chamber was only a short distance away, but Kaylee and Ethan knew it would be the most dangerous stretch of their journey. As they moved closer to the core, they could feel the intensity of the enemy's attack building. The ship itself seemed to groan under the pressure, its systems pushed to their limits. "We're almost there," Kaylee said, her voice strained but resolute. "Stay close." They entered the core chamber, where the heartbeat of the ship, the glowing energy core, lay protected by a force field. Outside, the enemy fleet closed in, their ships circling the area, preparing for their final assault. "This is it," Ethan said, eyeing the incoming ships on the display. "We hold the line here, or we don't survive." Kaylee stepped forward, raising the relic one last time. The energy from the Sentinel surged through her, feeding into the core. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the galaxy, for every world that had ever looked to the stars and dreamed of peace. With a deep breath, she made her choice. The relic blazed with light, and the Sentinel's massive form erupted in a burst of energy, its presence filling the room. The ship's systems synchronized with the Sentinel, amplifying her power to unprecedented levels. The force field around the core flared to life, and a shockwave of energy radiated outward, disintegrating the first wave of enemy ships. "They won't stop," Kaylee said through clenched teeth. "But I'll never stop fighting." The final battle was about to begin. And this time, the galaxy would see what true power really was.